Ja esteu desperts i despertes perquè comencem forts aquesta tarda, comencem amb una taula rodona. Abans recordeu que parlàvem del raw data i dèiem allò de l'oxímoron. Dèiem, raw data és un oxímoron perquè les dades no poden ser brutes perquè sempre estan netes, perquè sempre les cuinem. Doncs bé, alguns experts diuen que intel·ligència artificial també és un oxímoron. Mira, l'últim que ho ha dit, que potser l'haureu sentit, és l'economista Xavier Sala Martín, que sé que desperta tants fans com haters, no hi ha terme mig. O t'agrada molt en Sala Martín o no t'agrada gens. Bé, ell diu que la intel·ligència artificial ens fa por perquè l'associem a la natural, que és la que tenim els humans, però que la intel·ligència artificial no és intel·ligent, segons ell, perquè no pot planificar ni solucionar problemes ni entendre res. Home, jo li diria en Sala Martín, això és ara, no? 2023. Jo li diria, escolta'm, això és de moment. Perquè tal com avança la cosa, d'aquí pocs anys veurem com sí que pot planificar, solucionar problemes i entendre-ho tot per si sola, aquesta intel·ligència artificial. Portem al nostre terreny, que és el de l'arxivística. A l'actualitat la intel·ligència artificial aporta molts avantatges als arxius i molts de vosaltres ja ho coneixeu. Augment de la capacitat de computació i inferència de coneixement, intercanvi d'informació, tractament massiu de dades, però també cal preveure els riscos i, sobretot, buscar solucions a aquests riscos. Per exemple, vigilar i actuar sobre la qualitat de les dades, garantir la privacitat de la informació, a identificar i corregir males pràctiques d'aquesta contextualització de les dades, que és aquesta definició de la semàntica, que hem vist que important el context. En la vida en general, això als periodistes ens agrada molt, a mi m'agrada com a mínim, donar context a tot allò que fem. Importantíssim. Especialment preocupant, i això també, què us haig de dir, la intel·ligència artificial generativa, el famós xat GPT, ha sortit aquí també, la que crea nous continguts i que cada vegada provocarà que sigui més difícil entendre, discernir, diguem, entre la creativitat humana i l'artificial. I el que és pitjor, per mi, per tots i totes, és si aquella informació és veraç o no, perquè ara ja, algú em deia ahir, Clara, és que ara ja et poden gravar la teva veu, interpreten amb diferents, quan estàs enfadada, quan no, i ja no cal que parlis a la ràdio, ja podria parlar algú per dir, home, quina gràcia, no? Vull dir, clar, i les bromes que faig també les farà la intel·ligència artificial. En fi, la realitat tal com l'entenem els humans, jo diria que passarà a una altra dimensió, no sé si dir la dimensió desconeguda o la dimensió AI, on cal posar molt important, que de fet és el debat que tindrem ara, límits ètics a tot això. I d'això és del que parlarem en aquesta taula rodona, del compromís social dels professionals i les professionals de l'arxivística. Teniu el compromís que teniu sobre la informació que custodieu, difoneu i conserveu, i aquest compromís passa per garantir, entre d'altres aspectes, aquesta ètica a la utilització de la informació. Ara comença aquesta taula rodona que es diu, escolta, l'hem fet nosaltres, no l'ha fet el xat GPT. Ètica i AI. No ens compliquem la vida. Vosaltres que sabeu etiquetar, de què parlarem? Ètica i AI. Doncs escolta, no cal un subtítol. En parlarem amb Karina Gibert, amb Steinberg i en Suderman, i ja podeu sortir sense por i moderats per Anahí, Casadesús. Endavant, tenen por. Tenen por. Avanti. Us estem esperant. Aplaudiments per vosaltres, moderats per, com us deia, Anahí Casadesús, és de l'Escola Superior d'Arxivística i Gestió Documental de la Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. Anahí, et passo el testimoni. Ja estava aquí donant instruccions, ja s'estaven preparant. Tens per davant un compte enrere de 55 minuts on estic convençuda que tindrem un debat interessantíssim. Endavant.
Molt bé, moltes gràcies. Benvinguts a tots, gràcies a l'organització. La veritat és que està sent un congrés realment interessant, oi? I ara parlarem d'una cosa que jo crec que ens afecta a tots, que va molt bé parlar-la ara, perquè ja hem vist diferents experiències, diferents també teoritzacions i ponències més teòriques. I jo crec que estem veient que les diferents tecnologies, i sobretot la intel·ligència artificial, que és del que parlarem concretament, està cada vegada més present en el nostre àmbit laboral, en projectes que els podem veure més propers, més llunyans, de diferents països. I no tan sols això, sinó que està en el nostre dia a dia, en totes les aplicacions, totes no sé, però pràcticament totes les aplicacions que utilitzem, l'ordinador, el mòbil, i que les utilitzem sense ser conscients moltes vegades que estan allà. I jo crec que no podem deixar passar aquest canvi sense posar consciència, sense parar un moment i reflexionar. Hi haurà errors, ja n'hi ha hagut. Serà fonamental veure com reaccionem a aquests errors, no? En el moment en què esdevinguin, però jo crec que més important, avancem-nos a que passin, prevenir-los, ser capaços de visualitzar què és el que pot arribar a passar, desenvolupar plans d'acció per evitar-ho, tenir plans d'accions per mitigar els efectes un cop hagi passat. Jo crec que això és fonamental. També pensar aquestes tecnologies des d'una perspectiva ètica, inclusiva, social, accessible, transparent, responsable. Tots aquests aspectes. Perquè jo crec que, i com s'ha comentat en altres ponències, no estem treballant en qualsevol cosa. Al final estem treballant amb persones. Sí, són dades, és informació, però a darrere, o al davant, si volem millor, el que ja són persones. I, per tant, el tema ètic i totes aquestes consideracions crec que són fonamentals i que val la pena parar abans de començar, i ja això tot ha començat ja, però parar una mica i pensar. Informació, no hem dit informació, dades. Aquestes dades i aquesta informació el que fa és que es puguin prendre decisions que afecten la vida de les persones, el que comentàvem, que al final el que tenim són persones. I per tant tot això jo crec que mereix una bona reflexió, un bon acte de consciència ètica abans de començar, o si ja hem començat, doncs durant el trajecte. I és per això que avui estem aquí amb 3 persones que han treballat en profunditat aquestes qüestions des de diferents punts de vista, però sempre amb la intel·ligència artificial al focus i amb la informació també com a punt de referència. M'acompanyen en aquesta taula la Karina Gibert, el Suderman i la Mia Steinberg. Benvinguts. Estic encantada que m'acompanyeu en aquesta taula rodona. Estic molt contenta. I ara els presentaré breument i ja passarem al debat. Bé, la Karina Gibert és llicenciada i doctora en informàtica amb les especialitats d'estadística computacional i intel·ligència artificial. És directora i cofundadora del Centre de Recerca en Intelligent Data Science and Artificial Intelligence el 2018. És degana del Col·legi Oficial d'Enginyeria Informàtica de Catalunya des de fa 3 dies, vull dir que enhorabona. Experta de l'estratègia catalana en d'intel·ligència artificial, catalonia.ai, de la Generalitat de Catalunya. De fet, va participar activament en la redacció i el desplegament de la mateixa. Fa recerca en extracció de coneixement estratègic a partir de dades i en sistemes intel·ligents des d'una perspectiva ètica i explicable, molt important. I a més és molt activa, i això m'agrada molt, amb la reducció de l'escletxa de gènere en l'àmbit de les STEM. Té una àmplia experiència en els camps de salut, benestar, sistemes ambientals i sostenibilitat, turisme, transformació digital i els usos ètics i socials de la tecnologia. Benvinguda, Karina.
Gràcies. Plaer.
Al mig tenim el Jim, l'únic home d'aquesta taula, però molt ben acompanyat. El Jim, fixeu-vos, actualment està jubilat, però està molt i molt actiu. Va passar els últims anys de la seva carrera dirigint els programes d'arxiu, gestió de documents i accés a la informació a la ciutat de Toronto, a Canadà. També va participar en les primeres iniciatives basades en l'Smart City d'aquesta mateixa ciutat. Els seus interessos sempre han inclòs la governança de la informació que, segons ell mateix comenta, a partir de la seva experiència, sempre està fragmentada, és a dir, les responsabilitats s'estenen àmpliament, però normalment la coordinació no sempre funciona de manera correcta. Participa molt activament en el projecte de recerca d'Interpares, que segur que n'heu sentit a parlar, hi ha hagut ponents que ens han explicat molts projectes d'Interpares i a continuació de la nostra taula, de fet, hi ha un ponent que ens explicarà més experiències. I és el coordinador dins Interpares del grup de treball de gestió i administració. Actualment està liderant un estudi que avalua de manera comparada els codis ètics de l'àmbit de l'arxivística i la gestió de documents amb codis ètics de la intel·ligència artificial. Per tant, té molt a dir. Per últim, la Mia Steinberg, és analista de gestió documental a l'empresa Collabware, ubicada a Vancouver, Canadà també. Treballa amb clients del sector públic i privat, ajudant-los a migrar els seus fons documentals al núvol, el programari que ha desenvolupat la seva organització, així com també dissenyant la gestió de documents per tal d'automatitzar-la al màxim possible. També forma part del projecte d'Interpares, amb aquesta perspectiva o visió d'empresa privada, dins del grup de treball també de gestió i administració, on ha liderat un estudi que tenia com a objectiu principal el desenvolupament de directrius ètiques per a l'ús de la intel·ligència artificial en documents, en gestió documental. Per tant, també tenim una bona ponent aquí a la taula. I ja sense més, ara que ja els coneixeu una mica més, comencem el debat, nois. I m'agradaria fer-ho amb una primera pregunta que és molt genèrica. Quines són les vostres preocupacions principals en aquest nou entorn de la intel·ligència artificial? Jim, per exemple, comença tu.
Very well. What worries me the most? What's worried me the most, by the way, I'm going to just interrupt myself here for a second and say I'm delighted to be here, and my thanks to the Association for the invitation and for the opportunity to talk on this topic. My responses will be based on that comparative study between ethical principles in the AI community and the archival community in the form of my response. But what worries me is the hidden nature of AI. And I don't mean that anybody's trying to hide it, it's being embedded into technologies that we're already using. Some of them will be very familiar to us. Oh, you looked at this book? Other people who looked at this book also looked at these books. You know, that's a form of AI, and it's a fairly harmless form, I suppose, but it's a form that we might end up using in archives, for example. People who looked at these records also looked at these records. Would you be interested in seeing these records? And the hidden part that I'm referring to is all that 80% that Kardak was speaking about earlier, about data preparation. How well has the data been prepared to train that model for the purpose that it's being used for? Jeffrey Bowker also flagged how many layers of classification, conscious lay or deliberate lay and unconscious lay, have influenced that training data and the assessment of the strength, the utility of the model. So those are the things I think that worry me the most.
Yeah. So prior to my work in archives, I actually worked for a web marketing company doing Google search marketing. And so I came to this world with a perspective on how the internet works at the moment. And one of the things that worries me the most about AI is the fact that it is being developed so fast and being developed by private organizations. And we saw that exact pattern with search engine algorithms. And now there are baked-in biases within the search engine algorithms, within the algorithms that run Facebook and all of these different platforms, where it wasn't introduced purposefully. It was something that came about as a result of people who didn't realize that they were necessarily introducing biases, but those are now baked into the algorithms. It's almost impossible to go back and fix them. And so I think that there is the potential for AI to have some similar very early issues that become baked in and permanent. And we're at a point right now where we could try our best to mitigate some of that.
Yes, in fact, the biases are one of the most hot topics in that moment. And in my experience, we have a couple of drawbacks that are very important. One is how along the evolution of the AI when it is in production, so when a system has been trained, maybe well-trained or balance-trained, but it goes into the real world and then it starts to learn, it starts to adapt according to the interactions that the users have with the system. No? And in that part, we are very few developed. I mean, we have no techniques to understand in which moment this learning starts to increase biases or deform the original purpose of the algorithm or this kind of thing. There was that famous case so many years ago in which Microsoft was launching conversational assistant onto the general web. And in 16 hours, it became xenophobe, sexist, and racist, and he has to be just in 16 hours. And this, as you said, it was not intended. No. So this is something that happens. And also it happens that all those algorithms are, so you pretend when you are making these searches, you pretend that you are accessing in a free way on the general information. And what it happens is that all those algorithms filter so much all your access that you think you are accessing to the right information, but you only see a very small part. That's the one that the algorithm decided it's adapted to your profile or to your intention. And this is transparent. People don't know. People think it has been getting all the information and reacts as the information was general, but it is not. And for example, here in Catalonia, we are facing now a very serious problem because Google has been updating the browser in the last months. And by some reason, this is making a priority on contents in Spanish in regards of contents in Catalan. Right. You have no idea how much have downloaded the visits to all Catalan web in the last month. So, and this is just happening. Nobody is arranging. No, so all these kind of things are happening. We detect from time to time. Some others we hardly detect, and we need to take the control of
think about it and address the problem. Yeah, definitely. And creieu que, és a dir, que aquestes situacions que esteu comentant ens les estem trobant als arxivers en els nostres llocs de feina? Què en penseu d'això, els que sou arxivers, vaja, o treballeu amb arxivers?
So I don't come across it in my work at the moment, but we are at the precipice of developing AI. The reason I joined Interpares is that the CEO of my company has a really admirable dream to make use of all of the data that our software comes into contact with all of the metadata. There is so much information and there are so many ways, like we saw earlier today with the semantic connections that you can make and all of these things that would be so powerful for public records requests, for legal holds, for all of, needing to find information. But if we implement it too quickly, there is going to be almost immediately issues. So we are already seeing these things in the real world, certainly. Yeah,
I can add a little bit more to that. The smart city work that I was involved in at the City of Toronto was at a very preliminary stage. The city was not very advanced, but they had engaged Open Sidewalk. Sidewalk Toronto, that's what it was, which was a subsidiary of Alphabet. And so there was a lot of AI that was imagined in there. And so I was involved, as were some of my colleagues in the information management unit, generally in preparing materials for public consultations. It was both to allay concerns. It's not going to be used for surveillance, which was not always accepted as face value, and advantages. So it was literally trying to introduce some literacy to the public that was going to be on the receiving end of the smart city technology. Another instance was the City of Toronto accepts payments by credit card, and the implementation of the payment card industry has a data security standard. And that data security standard requires that you know where all your credit card information is, and it's controlled. Well, the City of Toronto, being the City of Toronto, had credit card information everywhere, including emails and things like that. Right. And so I know that the city used AI tools to try to identify that. And a good news outcome for those of you who are in the records retention business was our IT group finally started implementing the retention, disposal, the destruction of backup tapes according to the retention schedule. Because the payment card industry, they wouldn't take my word for it, they wouldn't take council's word for it, but the payment card industry said, no, we're cutting you off from credit cards if you don't get rid of that data. So they did. Win. So there are a couple of ways that it's involved. I can't speak to these specifically, the next one or two that I'm going to, but I know Peter Sullivan is going to speak to a little bit of digital imaging and also record classification. So these are things where record keepers are already using tools that are smart to assist with the work.
Yeah, in fact, when in most of the softwares that help to manage documents have some kind of learning on the profile and a recommender for the searches you do. So most of them are using AI, even in a low profile, but most of them has already included these things. So it means that when you start to work with this kind of softwares and you make your searches and you organize the thing in a certain way, the system learns and conditions what you see better and what you see first or what you see later along your work, no? And regarding this issue about personal data and the management of this personal data or these classified documents and all these kind of things requires a lot of, I would say, a lot of protocols that are not yet sufficiently mature, no? So even the people that is managing all these kind of things don't know very well. So it happened to me a couple of months ago in my university. We were talking about assigning hours to a project and blah, blah, blah. No? And at a certain point, my personal information from my personal account with all my projects was delivered to another colleague that is part of my team in one project, but it's not part of my normal team. No? And the lady that was in charge of everything was saying, no, he's the head of the group. No, he's not the head of the group. You have not the rights to send all this information to all these other people. So there is a lot of knowledge in that moment, and people is managing things without knowing well what are the limits or not limits, and this creates a lot of problems. No, and then there is another point that for me requires thinking. You were talking before about stopping and think. That's transparency. We, all of us, are in favor of transparency, and we are trying to evolve all the transparency systems of the governments and everywhere and blah, blah, blah. But we have to be very much careful with what we publish or not. So in the Barcelona City Council, a few months ago, there was, ¿cómo se dice? Una estafa. Una estafa.
Yeah, no.
They publish all the public contracts, no? But in the public contracts, in the public records, you have all the official information of the company, the quantity of the contract, and everything. So someone else was getting this file, phoning the city council and saying, I am this from this company with all the information. Please, we changed bank accounts, so next payment, more than 200,000 euros lost from the university, from the city council. So there are a lot of things that we have to think, and we have to find the right limits on how much we can publish without generating vulnerabilities and all these kind of things. No?
Actually,
this is very critical.
Jumping off of that, one of the concerns that I have about this is the fact, and you talked about transparency a little bit earlier, and when these algorithms, when these AI elements are being developed by organizations who have a profit motive, then those become trade secrets. This is a similar thing with the search algorithms. One of the reasons there's so little transparency is because there is tremendous value in keeping the intricacies of the algorithm's secret, but as a result, we have no idea. It's a black box. We have no idea what goes, what happens Data goes in, data comes out, something happens in between. And so I think as someone in the private sector, it is really important to me for us to take that approach from as early a moment as possible to sort of be aware of those motivations and try to act as ethically as we can to start off with, but also all of us in this, as archivists, as records management experts, we have the opportunity to start to develop those guidelines that organizations can maybe follow so that they can act thoughtfully and with some transparency. So yeah.
Yeah, and there is this issue about the transparency of the data and the transparency of the algorithms. This is another tension, no? Because it's competitiveness in regards to this transparency, and this is also another melon that we can open in another session. Because
we'll be here for 4 hours, it's fine.
M'ha interessat, has parlat de que a vegades que la gent que es dedica a fer aquests protocols o a treballar amb aquest tipus de tecnologies a vegades no sap ben bé o no té la formació suficient. Ara, just abans de dinar, hem tingut una taula sobre competències i m'agradaria preguntar-vos de manera molt breu, però és a dir, necessitem noves competències, ens hem de posar les piles amb això per donar resposta amb el que comentaves tu, per exemple.
Jo crec que és molt important, això. Sorry, I moved to English again.
De manera breu,
I think this is very crucial. I mean, technology is evolving in a supersonic speed, and people has to rush just trying to be updated. But it's true that when you develop your work and suddenly they block you with 7 new tools every 2 months, and you just need help to make the jump. No? And in that case, I think there are a couple of things that are very important. One is about all the ethics associated with privacy, digital rights, all this kind of skills that you need to interact in a secure form with the software, but also with the data that is related with the software. No? So what are we doing if we are putting virtual machines, double authentication issues, and then the secretary takes the password in the same place of the username and it puts on the top of the table and everybody that comes. No, I mean, all these things seems ridiculous, but in fact they make the difference. No? And there is also something else that I think is very important, is being proficient in querying. So how many times you go to a desk and you say, do you have this book or do you have a document talking about that? And the lady says, or the man says, no, but the document is in the database. And that's just because the query was not properly formulated. No? So we are still not sufficiently, not sufficiently formed to be sure that when we say, no, this document is not in this database, this is true. So most of the times when we say no, this is false. And it's just because we were not able to find, no? And we are not aware of that. So most people still think that non-finding is the same as non-existing, and this is very different things. That all these kind of things, I think, require a particular methodology of working, a particular methodology of querying the systems, a particular methodology to sort the documents or the materials from what you have to search and all these kind of things. So meta information is. So to be sure that you search and you find also all this meta information that has to be formulated, it's still in. I mean, I was working, my first project at the university 32 years ago was on meta information, in that case for statistical data from European Statistical Institute, no? And they were trying to harmonize the statistics along Europe and the different countries. Today, they still have problems on some of that things, no? So imagine after 30 years, with all the developments on semantic web and semantic search and annotation and natural language processing and all these kind of things, we still have problems to be sure that documents have or data has the metadata in the proper way, and it's still a challenge, no?
Yeah, I think new competencies are needed. A common set of principles between the AI community and the archival community is transparency. And in a lot of the archival ethical codes, that transparency means documenting. How did you make that decision that these records were archival and those can be destroyed? Or that this is how the records should be represented for search query and not this other way. So I think we all in this room have gained new competencies as computer technology has moved into the archival space. And I think as artificial intelligence tools and technology moves into our space, we need yet more competencies developed. And one of those, I think, is an AI literacy. So I think we need to understand what is going on in the AI world so that we can perceive how it might affect ours. For example, if your archival institution puts many records up on the public web for people to do remote research, that content could all be being scraped and datafied and jammed into a training model, into a training data set. Mm-hmm. So if part of our ethics are to be concerned about how information about the subjects of those records are being used, then we need to take that into account, I think. We might not be able to do much about it, but we need to understand if we're not even meeting our own ethical requirements.
I think that also it is crucial for us as archivists to have what I would call a data awareness when we are interacting with all of these things, and we are in the position to be able to also educate others about this. One of the things that was very fascinating to me when I was in graduate school to become an archivist was friends would come up and say, oh, there's, there was a fad for like a week where you could submit your photo to Google and it would tell you which piece of art you looked most like, right? And so I had friends in the program who were doing that, and I was just like, you have given your face to an AI training model, basically. We may not know exactly what, but like, if it's free, you are the product, and your information, your data is going to be used. And so to be able to start to think about the world, the digital world in that way, and how is my data going to be used? What could be happening here? I think would go a long way towards empowering not just archivists but the laymen as well to really take control of that.
This is very important. Here in Europe, we had a scandal some years ago because a Russian company was creating this free app where you put the photo and you look at yourself in 20 years later or something like that. And this app was installing a spy on all the cell phones. Yeah. This data was going to that company, but when you look at the cookies of the company, of the application, it say the company deserves the right to move this data to other jurisdictions. So, in Europe, we have all these AI Act, the AI European regulation that was issuing last 18th April or something like that. It was elevated to the European Parliament. We are working on this trustworthy AI ethical model that is very much developed and where we are putting the person in the center with all these human rights together. And we want an AI that respects privacy, is robust, safe, and educated, and every kind of things. And in all the formulation of this ethical model that's very beautiful, there are a lot of things that we have no idea how to implement or how to ensure that they will be respected. No? And even in the case that here in Europe we want this ethical model of AI, there are a lot of things that we have to take into account. One is, as you say, the awareness of the people on the risks of devoting personal data to all those gratuitous products that come in and out everywhere. The kind by which we are accepting cookies by default without reading anything, And also the risk, when you are more on the side of managing data, and you were talking about making data public and the risks associated to that, there is also something else that worries me a lot. That's the confusion of thinking that when you eliminate from a data set name, telephone, address, and other personal data, you can make whatever you want with this data. And just to make you understand what I'm meaning. So when you take off the personal data from a data set, this doesn't mean that all this information is safe. And it doesn't mean that the persons that generated this data, maybe clinical data, whatever it is, are safe. Because crossing data coming from different places, you may make emerge the individual identity of the people again, and other things. So there was an example, some last elections. Someone was taking the public data of water consumption aggregated by buildings, okay? But everybody knows that when the TV goes in advertisements, people go to the bath. So there is a peak on the water consumption, right? So just mining this public data that's aggregated, it's very far from personal data, you can identify the peaks, you can cross with the programming in TV, you can understand which are the TV chain that the people is looking at, you can understand the politics trend of the building, and this is terribly useful for policy campaigns, So just to let you know that eliminating name and address is not a guarantee that your identity or your political thinkings or your preferences or whatever it is become preserved. And this is something that we are still making research on finding the limits to these issues. So then these are things that...
Interessant, això que has comentat. Parlàvem una mica, ha sortit el tema de les normatives, la regulació de la Unió Europea, per exemple, als Estats Units també n'hi ha. M'agradaria saber la vostra opinió sobre si aquestes normatives, aquestes lleis que s'estan desenvolupant realment ens resulten útils per prevenir aquests riscos, o aquest ús indegut, o què en penseu? Per exemple, tu comentaves, Mia, que en un entorn d'intel·ligència artificial, un cop el biaix entra en el sistema, és molt difícil d'eliminar, no? Com prevenim que entri? Què es pot fer? És a dir, les regulacions ens ajuden, no ens ajuden? Serveixen d'alguna cosa?
That's a very good question. I think that regulations have tremendous potential to help, but much like the development of AI itself, it also has a lot of pitfalls. Is the short version of that answer, I would say. I think that we have seen what happens when there is no regulation. And that is clearly a situation we would want to avoid in the future. So some amount of oversight, some amount of guidance, some amount of expertise, experts who have, done the thinking and can develop some frameworks that organizations can follow, that is always going to be good. But just like with AI, the biases can creep into regulations as well. So it's, it's, as they say, it's turtles all the way down is the idiom.
Yeah, I think regulations are essential. I think that governance in an AI space will need an ecosystem of oversight. There will need to be ethical principles so that we know how to behave. There will need to be regulations so that there can be consequences and sanctions if we don't behave appropriately. One of the things I think that we've probably all heard is that regulations will come too slowly. And often regulations will come and they will be post hoc. So after the disaster has occurred, that's when the regulation will be brought into force. And I have an irrelevant example, which I will not share, but it just popped into my head. So even with the best intentions of the world, in the world, they say you can, if you give a man a fish, he will eat for a day, and if you teach a man to fish, then he will eat for a lifetime. But he might also create technology that allows him to drag the ocean floor and extinguish all life below water. So, the people who are developing technology have a different, will be governed by a different regulatory environment and by different ethics than the people who implement the technologies developed. So I think the interest, the expertise, the long history of archival experience and concepts are highly relevant if we want to get into regulations that guide as opposed to sanction. If that's clear. Is that clear? Okay.
Yeah, for me there is like a debate in between regulation and certification, no? Which are in the opposite sides of the chain values. So for me, the main problem that we have in that moment, we are in two important things. One is that ethics is something about values of the persons that interact and create technology. And the ethics or non-ethical use of technology most of the times depends on uses. It's not that much the technology itself, but how you are using it, no? So if you are using these tracking systems to improve mobility, maybe it's okay. If you are using the tracking system to learn if your employee or your citizens are arriving late to the work, to sanction them probably is not that nice, no? So depending on the use, the same technology might be favor or non-favor. And this is something that regards much more on the people that's interacting with the technology rather than any kind of law you can use. Because in the laws, of course, you go much more later than the development of the technology, but also provided that there is the system prepared to identify when an AI is non-compliant with the law, provided that we can do that. That's also a question. When you realize it, the damage is done, and then the single thing you can do is sanction. But you cannot prevent. Mm-hmm. And I think the most important thing here would be to develop systems to prevent. No? Yeah. And then we have another problem, because we are not producing chairs. So if you want to put a chair into the market, you have to pass some tests, some things, certifications, I don't know what, and then you start to put this thing in a physical space somewhere where it travels and passes export-import procedures, blah, blah, blah. But technology is not like that. So you have I have students in my university that they finish the classes at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. They meet with 2 or 3 friends. They write video games, whatever it is. That's nice. Oh, yes, I upload to Apple Store, and Apple Store in 2 days, this is in the market, and your mommy finds in his phone. And this is like that. So nobody is analyzing what is going into the market. So this is more on the side of certification, no? So we do, and of course this has an impact on time to market, of course. So there is a trade-off here that we have to find. But are we continuing invading the market with gratuitous things that we don't know who has been producing? We don't know what is in behind. Nobody can analyze. So people use this without knowledge, sufficient knowledge to understand where are the risks, no? So now in this European regulation, there is this classification, high risk, low risk, and blah, blah, blah. And the higher is the risk, the more requirements you have and the more inspections and these kind of things, no? But for me, we need to act into the way why the technology arrives to people. That's here is the risk. And it's another kind of regulation. It's a regulation at the beginning. It's not. We, the Parliament, say that you cannot make a system with facial recognition. Yeah, okay, but if you don't implement something before, that's a little bit useless, no?
Yeah, it's a little bit useless. I'd like to add a little bit to that, if I can. One of the interesting things I noticed in the archival codes of ethics is accountability is a key principle, but it's not clear in most codes to whom archivists are accountable. Whereas when I looked at the AI principles, it ranged accountability, again, a very important principal theme, but there was a lot of discussion about, whether the courts were good enough, we'll just leave it to the courts and it'll sort itself out there, or whether there should be an oversight body, and who should be on that oversight body. Well, they'll tell you it's the same people who should be identifying the data to train a model. It should be a very diverse group, and with people from different experiences, different backgrounds. It can't all be white men and it can't all be technologists. It's got to be people who understand how the world maybe should work, ideally. And so whether it's police, if you're an archivist for a police agency, police services, to your point, in Toronto we had people using Clearview technology as part of their investigative techniques. It was not sanctioned by the Toronto Police Service, but they saw it, they thought this will help me, and so they used it. And I think one of the things that archivists need to be aware of is usually archival organizations are not overfunded. They don't have more money than they know what to do with. So we're likely to use off-the-shelf tools. So what is our due diligence? How do we know that one vendor is providing us with an ethical, properly trained model, and another vendor that's much cheaper, maybe it has been trained not so well?
Yeah, that's nice. We are here in Catalonia, because we had a Catalan strategy on AI that was enacting in 2020, and we opened an observatory for ethics in AI that has developed a seal. So it's gratuitous, and we are now promoting that the people that is creating products that are AI-based can pass the seal, and if they get the green seal, we expect that they will mark their applications with that. And I think this is something that might accelerate the information for the users. So the same as when you are buying a fridge, you have if it is energy efficient or not, because it has this thing. So I think this is something that might go quicker than regulation. It's even before certification, but it is something that if it is properly adopted, can help the people to understand which kind of product you are in front of. No? That's also another possibility.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. Creieu, canviant una mica de tema, hem parlat de regulació, ara anem a parlar de codis ètics, no? Un altre tipus de regulació, podríem dir. Creieu que les consideracions ètiques de l'àmbit de l'arxivística són suficients per aquest context en el que ens trobem? És a dir, necessitem una nova perspectiva o necessitem actualitzar aquests codis ètics que tenim actualment, no? Que existeixen actualment. Què en penseu?
All right, so in Canada, the Arrangement and Description Standard, we call it RAD, Rules for Arrangement and Description, and the section on electronic records is like a page long. So similarly with, the code of ethics, I think that resting on the laurels, resting on what we already have is a very narrow view and also gives ourselves too much credit. If we're going to be trying to act ethically, that means we have to be interrogating ourselves as much, if not more often, than we are interrogating other systems. So in terms of the archival code of ethics and with AI, it also, I would think, would need to start almost from the very, very beginning to really build up something that, rather than just attaching onto the existing codes, would really evaluate, why do we need this? What are we trying to do here? And so it definitely will help, but needs some, more than just a page.
The ethical codes that I've been looking at in the archives community usually have sort of two main sections. One is what we do, and the other one is who we are, how we behave, whatever you want to say. In Canada, certainly, but elsewhere as well, the archival community is in a state of transition, particularly in relation to how we behave.
Yeah.
There's a huge emphasis on inclusivity, on diversity, on harm reduction, things like that. That's very much growing, particularly in the English-speaking world. I have read the Catalonian Association's Code of Ethics and the English translation, and it is there too. You can even see hints of it back in 1996 with the ICA's Code of Ethics, which really credits the authors of that code. But as I say, it's an accelerating transformation about how we behave. So if we're looking at how we behave and how actions we take will affect the users of the records, they may be looking at records of trauma, war records, things like that. Some people will react differently to those kinds of records than others, and we may not have any warnings currently about those sorts of things. But I think with AI, we're also moving into what we do. So I think one of the things we need our codes to do for us is advocate digital literacy, which means, to Mia's point, we ourselves need to be literate, or we can't advocate very effectively for it. I think, so that's from a data literacy standpoint. I think as well, we need to advocate for AI literacy. We need to support school initiatives, and I know they're happening, where children are taught, young people are taught how to think critically. So if they see it on the web or on their device, they don't just take it as true the way my father sometimes takes things he finds on the web to be true. So yeah, I think ethics are part of that ecosystem that can't all be regulated, but it needs to inform our educational programs in archives. What we do and how we do it needs to inform, and I know that's a driving some of the changes that I've been talking about as well. We need to understand how social initiatives, social priorities, and I realize we're running out of time and my chair is giving me a look here. We have a reconciliation framework that was prepared by the Steering Committee on Canada's archives, and it has to do with following accepted archival practices that didn't necessarily foster a bias, but they fostered a prejudice and a minimization of the Indigenous people in Canada. So yeah, we may even need regulations for ourselves since we don't have so many directly right now. So long answer, yeah, I agree with Mia. Needs changing, needs updating.
Well, I'm not much aware of the ethical code for your field, but of course, when we are in the middle of a changing paradigm, no? So the entire society is moving towards digital society. So everything will be digitalized. All the relevant information from all of us will end up into archives and somewhere in the digital area. And of course, this requires an upgrade of all the ethical behavior of all the persons that is working into this, in all the different aspects of all this digitalization process. No? And of course, when you are introducing a technology that much powerful as AI in the middle of the scene, everybody needs to be aware of which kind of tool is that thing, how much damage you can produce just dismissing a small detail, no? And of course, this probably requires upgrades of all ethical codes, yours and also the computer scientist ones. Also.
Okay, so we don't have more time. Thank you all.
0, 0, 0.
Yeah, we did it. Very good. Bé, jo em quedo amb unes consideracions finals del que hem estat parlant, simplement per tancar.
Tranquil·la,
M'agradaria destacar el tema de la velocitat, no? A la que va tot això i el punt en el que no sabem quan l'algoritme canvia o va cap a un lloc que nosaltres no havíem pensat. També, amb el tema de les competències, sí que necessitem noves competències també relacionades amb ètica, no només amb tecnologies, no? També necessitem ajuda per fer el salt, és a dir, no estem sols i no és una cosa que puguem fer sols. Com la tecnologia arriba a les persones i com les persones la utilitzen, que això moltes vegades, per molt que tu hagis seguit les normatives i demés, el que fa és canviar tot el que havies pensat o havies imaginat. També sobre el tema dels codis ètics, sí que ajuden, però és veritat que necessitem posar-nos al dia, actualitzar i posar-nos a treballar amb això. I per últim, jo crec que una de les coses més importants que han comentat els ponents és la qüestió de la prevenció, prevenir els riscos, no esperar que passin per després actuar. Jo crec que aquí és el moment de parar, pensar en aquests riscos i intentar evitar que passin.
Anahí, un resum fantàstic d'aquesta taula rodona que se'ns ha fet curta, perquè ètica i intel·ligència artificial és el debat que tenim ara mateix sobre la taula i n'hem parlat a fons. Gràcies, Anahí, gràcies també a Karina Gibert, a la Mia Steinberg i a Jim Sutherland. Un fort aplaudiment per tots quatre. Thank you very much. Moltes gràcies. Congratulations. Podeu tornar al vostre lloc i nosaltres avancem. Jo diria que continuem abduïts i abduïdes encara per la...